Well, let's Feral Audio. Boy, we got a lot of podcasts on that network. This guy's got one of them. His name is Dr. PhD Dr. Chris Ryan, and he has he has a podcast called Tangentially Speaking. Oh God! Sorry. No, yeah, please sit. There was that hang time
where
Lorraine
stayed. It's great.
I thought
now I can say I've been on a stage with Lorraine Newman.
Yeah. It feels important. I didn't want to blow her off, but also because you are the interesting thing about your the book that you wrote. It involves monogamy versus polygamy in our species as primates. You are a guy whose PhD is in psychology, but you you stumbled into anthropology, wrote a book where you didn't have any horse in the race, but you kind of ended up making the case, and this is a very sensitive issue for people, myself included. Everybody gets their buttons pushed by this idea of, is humankind naturally monogamous?
Yeah. It's a funny thing. Like, people want to believe that we are when all the evidence suggests we're not. So that makes it a conflictive kind of conversation.
But also in anthropology, then don't you count the fact that we all want to believe we are as evidence to the fact that we are?
No.
Behaviorally...
That's the difference between science and bullshit right there. You summed it up. No, I mean, if you look, I was just doing a thing the other night with Moshe Kasher and some comedians talking about science. And I mean, the simplest way to explain human behavior is to say we're not a polygamous species, right? Polygamy would be one male and several females. That we're a promiscuous species, where both the males and the females had multiple sexual partners. So the simplest way to explain contemporary human behavior is simply to say we're a promiscuous species that's being told to be monogamous.
Right. And we can roll with that because of how promiscuous we are. It's like a Swiss Army knife being told you have to open wine bottles.
Right. but the blade comes out occasionally, right?
Yeah, we're still Swiss.
Yeah, we're still Swiss.
Yeah, and it's based a lot on humans are related to chimps most closely of all, and of those chimps, it's how do you pronounce it? Bonobo?
Bonobo. Yeah.
They are here's where I lay my cards on the table. This is why I refer to you as the Dan Harmon of informed people, because I read one book about this and pretend to be an expert on all this, and you wrote a book on it and probably read a million books on it and don't pretend to be an expert on it. But I read Desmond Morris's book from the 60s, The Naked Ape. And I think he was the one that talked about the bonobo chimps, and he talked about specifically how back in the day when science was still actually accountable to some degree to social propriety, when you're just studying chimps fucking, they had found this breed of chimps. Is that accurate to call bonobos a breed of chimps?
Well, they used to be called pygmy chimps. Despite the fact that they're not really smaller than common chimps.
Right.
They're a separate species. In fact, Jared Diamond, who wrote Guns, Germs, and Steel and a bunch of other things, argues quite convincingly that chimps, humans, and bonobos are really three subspecies of chimpanzee.
Right, okay.
We're so closely related. If you go to the zoo and you see the chimps or the bonobos in the zoo, you are more closely related to them than they are to anything else in the zoo. Gorillas or orangutans or what have you. So the chimps, humans, and bonobos are more closely related, for example, than the Indian elephant is to the African elephant.
Oh, well, okay.
Right? In terms of just genetic,
last common ancestor and shared DNA.
Wow.
Yeah. We're extremely closely related to them.
What percentage is our DNA linked to a chimpanzee?
Well, there are many different ways that scientists use to measure that, so numbers vary, but from 98 to 95.5% is the general range.
But also,
but I mean, that's kind of a nonsense thing
because we have 70% in common with watermelon.
That 0.5%, yeah, exactly.
A watermelon is 98% water, like genetically.
So are we.
Yeah, exactly.
All I know is we don't have to go to work tomorrow. That's what I'm getting from all this.
Also, interestingly, speaking of not going to work, both chimps and bonobos sleep in hammocks, which I find really fascinating. I love hammocks.
In nature, or just when they're provided them?
No, they weave hammocks every night. They weave branches together and sleep in them.
They create hammocks.
So we argue, Casilda, my wife and I, who's back there somewhere, argue in Sex at Dawn that hammocks are the first human technology.
I fucking love
humanity.
hammocks. I thought that was a... But when you get into a hammock, it feels so good. I thought it was because I had Asperger's or something. It's because I'm a monkey. So the
it's
bonobos,
primal, man.
So Desmond Morris's book, and a lot of what Desmond Morris discussed, has been subsequently questioned and challenged and stuff. But what he talks about is they discovered this type of chimp who's really more closely related to us, or as you're saying, like they're like cousins of.
Well, they're equidistant from us.
Like we both descended from chimps, and the interesting thing about them was always how much fucking and sucking they did. Like they are incestuous, they are bisexual, they are he referred to them settling gang disputes through orgies.
They're known as the aristocrats of the jungle.
They do it all.
Guy goes into a talent office.
They make the Kama Sutra look like an episode of My Three Sons. Like
Guy goes into a hammock.
and early in the 50s, when they're discovering this stuff, they're sort of discovering it and going, weird monkey. And then over time, we're going, wait. That's us. That's what's going on. That's what's raging inside our brain.
Yeah, they're also the only other mammal that has sex face to face.
Right.
Right. They stare into each other's eyes. They kiss. They have oral sex. They exchange food while they're having sex.
Gross. That's gross. I don't like food and sex. Whenever there's chocolate
Talk to
syrup
Mickey Rourke, baby.
Yeah, I don't like it.
Whipped cream. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like leave the food out of it.
Yeah. Frans de Waal, who's a very famous Dutch primatologist, said that chimpanzees use violence to get sex, and bonobos use sex to avoid violence.
Yeah.
In about 50 years of observation, both in the jungle and in captivity, no bonobo has ever been witnessed to kill or rape another bonobo. Not once. And believe me, if you're the first one to see it, your career is made, right? So they're looking for it.
That's the holy grail of primatology.
Right.
You just created a whole new weird payola scandal that's going to happen.
Bonobo rape porn. Yeah.
It's going to 30 years from now. Bonobo rape staged by Dr. Santa.
Paid for in Bitcoin.
So we do with that information though. Here's okay. So let's walk through the emotional experience that a human being with a necktie that's got to go to work tomorrow at 9 a.m. That loves his wife and loves his kids. What the emotional thought experience that he has when he reads a scientist saying that human beings aren't naturally monogamous. The natural experience is that person says, well, that is implying that my life is a lie. That's implying that...
Yeah, but that's a mistake. That's a very shallow interpretation. That's like if you're talking to a vegetarian and you say our ancestors were omnivores. Is the vegetarian going to say, therefore my life is a lie? I don't think so. I think most vegetarians would say, yeah, of course they were. That's why being a vegetarian is hard, but I still choose to do it.
We're also clearly descended from a lot of murderers. Like we bashed each other's brains in and slurped our brains from each other's skulls. We don't have to keep doing that.
Fast. I agree with the sentiment of what you're saying, but people often say to me, because I'm like in the business of talking about human nature, right? Which everybody's got an opinion on. People say like, okay, what is human nature? Are we naturally violent, as you're suggesting, like Steven Pinker suggests and others, or are we naturally
fuck
generous?
Pinker.
Fuck Steven Pinker. I know, I've said that many times. But What the hell was I saying? Steven Pinker always sidetracks me. But the thing is, we are, there's all sorts of interesting research showing that toddlers of 6 months old already have a sense of justice. And one thing I often say is, look, nobody's walking around suffering from PTSD because they helped a stranger. Right? So no matter how violent you think we are by nature, it's interesting that we have to be trained to hurt each other.
Yeah.
And even after boot camp, it still fucks us up.
Right.
So I think that the evidence is quite clear that we are, by nature, a species very interested in justice, in egalitarianism.
And compassion.
And compassion. That's our nature. We can, under extreme circumstances, be extremely cruel and nasty and bizarre, but that's not our nature as a species.
And what do we share? So what do we share that with? Who's the common ancestor that wants to rip throats out? If we are actually, well, it's the chimpanzee, according to, if we're equidistant with bonobos from the chimp, then bonobos are like fucking and sucking and swinging. They're the 70s of chimpanzees.
They're the hippies.
And we're over here being like, we're Devo going like, okay, we can do this. Let's just build a couple more skyscrapers and beep, boop, boop, boop. But we all have that grandfather, that great Santini above us going like, get in there, get your ass in the dirt, private! Rip that throat out, tell that woman what's her job!
Dan, when is your book Mixed Metaphors coming out?
It's an album, Jeff. And it's going to be the book of movies.
So, what do you think is the final word on us? Like,
What's the final word on us?
No. So, I believe so too. Like children in a sandpit aren't racist. We learn that. And also, I don't think we're naturally. I think we're naturally. There's a bit of competition and competitiveness in us, but I don't think that, like you said, we have an innate sense of justice. I think there's other things that come along later on, like capitalism and governments, that we reward war and we reward conflict.
Yeah, property.
Yeah.
Well, see, that's the essential difference. I mean, that's really what our book is about, is to understand that our species has existed for at least 200,000 years as an anatomically modern species, right? Agriculture only came about 10,000 years ago. So that's 5% of our time on Earth as a species, or much less if you include pre-modern species of human, right? So it's a very small percentage in any case. And before agriculture, the way societies were designed was completely different from the way it is after agriculture. Think about property. All hunter-gatherer people are what anthropologists call fiercely egalitarian. They share everything. And if you don't share, fuck you, get the hell out of here. Which is why anthropologists have a big problem when they show up with a big box full of chocolate bars and peanut butter to last a whole year while they're doing their research, and they won't share it with anybody. The people are like, what the fuck, what kind of person are you? You come here, you eat our food, you ask me about my grandfather, you want to study everything, and you won't share your peanut butter with us, right? It's a completely different mindset.
But then when they give them the peanut butter,
they're
like, okay, so how was the world created? From peanut butter! Oh, I love it!
It's true. Cults.
That's another big
Cargo
problem.
cults. Yeah. There are people who believe that the gods give canned goods. You know that? But that's another story.
So how did it change when agriculture came along?
Well, agriculture introduced the concept of private property, and now people lived in settlements. They could accumulate property. So for the first time, men really had a reason to care about their paternity, because, like, I don't want to leave, this building that I've...
They weren't nomadic anymore.
They weren't, yeah, exactly. They weren't nomadic.
It's so interesting.
So that's when they took control of women, right? And that's when women became property. If you read the Old Testament, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, we all think that's like respect his marriage, right? No. Read it in context. It continues, nor his house, nor his slave, nor his she-ass, nor his ox. Don't covet thy neighbor's property. And the wife is just part of the property.
Right.
So it's a huge change.
But so when people are hunting, when people are out there with spears, like, okay, they're like a football team running around. Let's go kill some mammoth, and we'll bring the mammoth meat back to wherever we're camped for the night. You're saying that's fiercely egalitarian because we're maybe the women are staying behind. I don't know if that's politically incorrect to imply, but I can't go back in time and see it. But you're saying that like the agricultural societies where there's like we live in one place, we have a city, we're going to irrigate these crops,
and you can store grain. There's
Exactly.
leisure time because you can actually you can start to store crops, and you can have a granary where you can live.
But that's
year-round.
also where math comes from. It's where astronomy comes from. It's where
leisure time.
Civilization.
But why? And I'm sorry. What's your first name again? I'm sorry.
Chris.
Why do women become property then?
Because when men have property, then they're very concerned with their paternity, so that they're leaving their property to their sons.
But why is it men that have the property when agriculture comes along?
Because the main advantage in agricultural societies is upper body strength because of the plow, that you had to be able to control a plow. Also, warfare became very important because agricultural societies tend to expand. So they're
protecting borders.
Right. So women in hunter-gatherer societies have equal or sometimes higher status than men. But women rule in a completely different way, through consensus. Men in matriarchal societies get laid a lot. It's much better. For example, bonobos are female-dominated. Even though the female bonobo is a little smaller than the male, as with chimps and humans, if a male attacks a female, all the females will gang up on that male and attack him.
So when you're running a plow and to be agricultural, you need that upper body strength. Men are they're running their farms. They become the rulers. Then there's more time to build structures.
And specialization.
Permanent structures that last for a long time.
Right.
So then that's when you say patriarchy comes along with like let's make sure the hereditary, like the bloodline stays. Then you have rulers, and that's when men become assholes.
Yeah, that's when the inner asshole comes out.
I have to update my Joseph Campbell informed understanding of how this all worked was that it was these male-dominated football squads I pictured these cavemen in these fur loincloth, going you take the left, you take the right, Johnson go 20, go deep, and they spear these animals and they take the meat back home to these little encampments, and then those encampments travel, and then those assholes go down to the equator where these incredibly advanced societies have been formed, sometimes incredibly brutal, but advanced societies have been formed because they're able to, because they live in a more equatorial climate, they have created a society around the stars and the rising tide and all that stuff. And then these patriarchal guys come in and go, fuck you, you may be organized, but you don't know home invasion. Like we do, and they just take over, and they're idiots, but they own the alphabet. They're just okay, A, B, C, D, I guess. That was my understanding of it. But
is that what Joseph Campbell said?
That was the picture I got from him. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're right that the men generally, and it's not politically incorrect. It's accurate according to the data I've read, that the men generally went hunting, and the women generally gathered. Now, what's interesting is that about 60 to 70% of the calories that people lived on came from the gathering, not from the hunting. Right? So, I mean, and there are all sorts of things we recount in our book. Like in the Amazon, there's a tribe, the Kulina, that have a ritual where when the men... Okay, so men don't like to hunt, generally, right? They'll go occasionally, but men are lazy. They're in their hammocks, right? So the women have a ritual called the Dutsiet Bwane, where in the morning, the women will get up and they'll go around the village and they sing the song that it basically translates to, we want meat, you men don't give us enough meat. And I wrote to the anthropologist and I said, is there a double entendre there? And he was like, yeah, definitely.
Lorraine is casting a wry glance right now.
Yeah. So they go around the village and the women will, they'll go up to the man who's lying in his hammock and a woman will go and bang on the post where his hammock is tied. And this is not the woman he normally has sex with, right? And what it means is, if you come home with some meat tonight, I'll fuck you. So it's motivation for these guys, I get some strange if I kill a monkey.
I get some strange. So we should rename our species to Hominus pivinus. Sorry, that's a Jeremy Piven joke.
Strange seeking missile. Yeah. So so then the guys, like, if you're not into that woman, you can say, oh, my stomach's bad, and like, okay, they'll let it ride, right? But so then the guys will get together. Now in the Amazon, they hunt independently because the game is very sparse in it's monkeys basically, and they're spread out. So the guys will all leave the village together, but before they split up, they agree to meet at a certain place at a certain time. So then they go out. A couple of the guys will shoot a monkey. The others won't. They'll come back. They got a couple of monkeys. They cut up the monkeys. So every guy walks back into the village with meat. And they all get laid.
Wow.
And the anthropologist who wrote this in an academic paper at the end, he wrote, the Kulina participate in this ritual in very good cheer. Of course they do.
So now, as a guy who is delving into all of this, as a married guy who's in love with his wife and who has his own ego and his own
what meat did you get today?
when you come up against this point where you go like, oh, this is how humans. How do you like we talked about this earlier? So our human species, monogamy is it may not be an instinct for us, but it's something that we want to do and that is worthwhile, and that way. I'm asking you, as the guy who wrote the book and who is married, how you're coping with that information as it's coming in.
Why
doesn't it change you? Why don't you run out naked in the street and become the guy who's preaching the gospel of polygamy?
Would you like us to talk about Chevy again?
Has he run out naked in the street?
Yeah, if you're saying that we're not scientifically hardwired to monogamy, why is that something that's persisted? Is there a benefit socially for us?
Well, it's an economic institution that's persisted because of private property, because it makes more sense and fits into an economic world that we've lived in for quite a while.
Now, okay, then I have another question. Since, if that really is the roots of misogyny and male domination and grossness, why, since we aren't really a hunter-gatherer society, and really we're not an agricultural society. We certainly need agriculture to survive, but we don't need upper body strength to survive anymore. Why does that male domination persist now? Is that just a hangover from that long ago, or do we know why women still get less money and why we still treat women like shit all the time? And why does that persist?
Well, I think women are still subjugated in the sense that they're still seen largely as breeding vessels in much of the world, and in this part of the world until very recently. Adultery, as defined in the Bible and as defined in Western society until 20 years ago, only referred to the women. You weren't an adulterer if you screwed a single woman even though you were married.
Right, and then you have the bastard son running around, the right. Game of Thrones thing where it's like, it's okay to have your seed perched somewhere on accident.
In fact, it's advantageous. It was a sign of wealth and power. So, I mean, there are a lot of lingering effects of this in Western society, and certainly if you look at, Iran or Afghanistan, where women are still being stoned to death for the crime of having been raped, right? It's insane. So women are still seen as property very much. And what we really rebelled against in our book is this idea that women are by nature gold diggers, right? Women are by their very nature trading sexual access for, goods and services for men, for status or meat in the ancestral environment or whatever it is. That's bullshit. Women were put in a position where all they had left to barter with was their sexuality. So of course they did in order to survive. Because if you had a kid as a single woman in Victorian England in Darwin's day, you were a piece of shit. You were thrown into the street and your kids would starve to death.
Yeah, if you're not allowed to be a senator ever,
right,
and you don't have a penis, and you're ambitious.
So what do you do?
Yeah, it's a dead end.
Survive. I mean, you try to survive. So, but what was your question? What do you do?
Well, my question was, what do you say to yourself naked? At night as you go to bed next to your lovely wife, as you turn out the light and you go, I got my dog. Do you have kids? You're living the American dream. You got your white picket fence. You wrote a book that says that people want to fuck everybody.
They do. Just look at them, right?
What's the follow-up to that? What's the epilogue to that, to a happily married man?
The epilogue is that we all make our own decisions. And that, as I said earlier about vegetarianism.
We also want to take a shit, but we do it in a toilet. We also want to pick our nose, but we don't eat it.
Why are you equating sex with horrible things?
Hear him out, doctor.
Well, I jumped. Go ahead, finish.
No, I mean,
I assume that's what you were going to say.
No, I think people find their own compromises. People find ways. The only thing, we don't advocate anything in the book. The only thing, as in terms of behavior, we only advocate compassion and understanding. And let's start from a realistic understanding of what sort of species we are. So we look at anthropology, we look at primatology, we look at human anatomy, particularly reproductive anatomy, the shape of the penis, the volume of the testicles, the fact that women can have multiple orgasms. I got in trouble giving a TED Talk because Meg Ryan was in the audience, and I decided to go off script and talked about female copulatory vocalization. Right? And that really pissed them off.
She can't have a problem with that.
She doesn't, but the guy who runs TED did.
Oh.
Yeah.
He was like, I won't have what you're saying she's having. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Well, there's also something to be said about monogamy in the context of children. I mean, there's a lot of evidence of the destructive impact of, a parent leaving,
Desmond Morris's book, which is, again, it's totally the only anthropology book I've ever read, by this guy in the 60s who literally, that guy, I don't think in this book he said it, but he did say, just to put this in context, he did imply that women's breasts evolved to look the way they did so that they would remind men of their butts.
That's called the genital echo theory.
That's just to put it in
to
context
remind men of their
like,
own butts.
Like a lot of founding fathers of like theories that we end up building stuff on. They, you put it in context. You're like, oh, you know what else Freud thought? He thought this. Like, you don't discount Freud, but it was a different time. Anyways, that was the one book I read, and the thing that really stuck with me was this idea of pair bonding and neoteny. He talked about how humanity was in the crosshairs of nature, and we were going to be exterminated from the earth if we didn't figure out a fucking way to survive, and we had to do it through change, and we had to start emulating the pack hunting, like biological killing machines around us. And as we did, we had to really hunker down and stop being like these bonobos. I don't know if he knew they were called bonobos or not, but stop being like our forebears and start like making some changes. And one of those changes was we got to focus on the brain biologically. And because that makes a baby harder to take care of for a longer time, we got to focus on pair bonding. So we gotta fall in love. We gotta look at each other, and we gotta go, I'm gonna have a baby with you. And when we have that baby with somebody, it's gotta mean something, and we gotta stick with them. And that all came out of our advancement. That as we started walking upright, and as we lost our hair, and as we started learning to use tools, and as we invented alphabets, we were also learning to love each other, precisely because our children until an unreasonable amount of time, in the amount of time that it takes a kid to be able to beat off a wolf with a stick, you can have a whole wolf. That wolf that he's beating off with a stick is retiring. It's going like, I'm too old for this shit. The humans live until they're a very, very old age, and their childhood is like largely spent being a gelatinous blob of crying, snotty garbage. And so you need somebody to stick around and take care of it. And so we took that direction away from the bonobos. Like, you don't just climb up in a tree. You don't just like hit the hills when you hear a distress call. We took a different path, and part of that path was us going, okay, you and me, hey, you, Cindy, okay, yes, Carl, yeah, no matter what happens, right? For real, okay. and that became that the people that felt that
Cindy
way,
and Carl,
at the dawn of time, that the people that felt that way, and this is what's crazy. That's a crazy idea that the people that felt, but then again, we have dogs shaped like corkscrews, they're more genetically malleable. But the people that felt that way survived longer. The humanity that survived the ice ages and whatever the hell happened to us, there were the people that coupled up and said, like, I love Cindy.
But let's look at the unarticulated assumptions in that, right?
I think everything I said was totally scientifically airtight. I can't even begin to imagine in all the years of research.
Everything you said was articulated. I'll give you that. This little pink houses theory of human evolution. What is it? Jack and Diane, right?
Cindy and Carl.
Yeah, Cindy and Carl, sorry. What that assumes is that we evolved in nuclear families. Right? Casilda and I, in our book, we call this flintstoneization. This tendency to look around at the modern world and project it into prehistory as a way to explain and justify the way we are now. The fact is, hunter-gatherers don't live in nuclear families. They live in band-level societies of 150 people or fewer, in which they all take care of children. So I certainly agree with you that 2 parents is better than 1, but you know what's even better? 15 parents,
right, like
20
cats.
Parents. Right. And running around with a bunch of kids your age, a little older than you. A 7-year-old respects the opinion of a 10-year-old way more than the opinion of an adult, right? So there are all sorts of things built into us as a species that are resonant with band-level societies.
Got it.
Casilda, who grew up in Africa, told me this beautiful expression: the best place to store extra food is in your friend's stomach. Makes perfect sense. Right? There was no refrigeration. There was no accumulated resources. So if you went out and you killed a deer and you came back and you said, according to your Jack and Diane theory, I'm only going to share this meat with my wife and my kids, assuming you knew they were your kids somehow, because you're out hunting. How the hell do you know who she's fucking? Right?
I have a really weirdly shaped penis. There's absolutely no way the woman that beds with me successfully could ever let another man. That was my weird strain of biology. We're like the Habsburgs, but it's like a weird strain of DNA. It looks a corkscrew. That's too simplistic because that's like a lock that could be picked. It's like my penis looks like a common house key. And so did my great-grandfather's. What were you saying? That's how I would know back then. That's how I would know.
So, anyway, the anthropological data is very clear that hunter-gatherer people did not live in nuclear families. They did not live in sexual exclusive pair bonds. So this theory that, the ones where the man stayed and took care of the woman, well, first of all, he didn't stay because he had to go hunting.
God.
Secondly, the last thing he would do is share the meat only with his wife because that would get them all kicked out of the damn band, which is what they're depending on for survival. Sorry. And then you look at anthropological data, like, for example, in the Amazon and Papua New Guinea and other parts of the world, there are a whole bunch of societies that believe in something that anthropologists call partible paternity, which is that, we assume that everybody knew that one sex act could result in a baby. That's not true. In fact, still today, lots of people don't know that. Darwin didn't know that, right? So, these people believe that a fetus is quite literally made of accumulated semen. So a woman, sorry to gross you out, but a woman who wants to have a baby, as all women do, that's smart and funny and good looking, will have sex with the smart guy, the funny guy, and the good looking guy to get their semen into her fetus. And then when she accumulates a certain amount of semen, then it starts to become a baby. And then when she has the baby, all of these different men will come forward and say, yeah, I'm a father. And they're all there are different words in the language for the one who put it in, the one who spilled it out, the one who mixed it around. Yeah, it's gangbang porn in the Amazon.
I have a partial right now.
The one who mixed it around. I don't want to be that guy.
I know.
That's the beta male of Papua New Guinea, right?
No.
Oh, no, you You stirred it. You stirred it. Good job, Roger.
Go ahead. I'll be right there.
I want to be the guy that mixes it around.
I mean, Cletus is the reason he's tall, and Tim's the reason he's smart. But you stirred them. You stirred them together.
Every name starts with C in your tribe.